Hi, welcome back. In this particular unit, 4.11, which is specific to chapter 11, we're going to talk about data visualization, some basics of it. That's why it's 101. This is going to be a very short unit. In the introduction, we'll talk about some basics of data visualization, and we'll try to pay attention to some bad practices, actually speaking. Then the next slide, we'll talk about some best practices, and then we'll move on to the next unit, 4.12, which is data visualization 102. Okay, so what is data visualization? Well, it's an art of creating charts based on the data you've collected. Um, and it's not just creating charts of any type. Like for this instance, this example of a chart is not a good chart. The idea of creating charts is to convey uh, a story, to support the report you're creating, and it is in a way that it's easily readable, accessible, and easily understandable. And on top of that, it can be beautiful. But if you just try to make it beautiful like this one and not informative, then it doesn't serve the purpose. So it's an art in that sense that you are trying to create a chart to convey your message as clearly, simply, succinctly, and in an easily readable format. That's the main idea of data visualization. Now, you can create data visualization for several purposes. You can be doing it for your own sake, where you have some data, you want to quickly look at the patterns in order to see if you can create some questions or related to the topic that you're interested in. Um, or you can be doing it for others. If you are working somewhere and you need to create some reports to summarize the patterns in the data, you can do it. You can be doing it for others. Or, for example, you can be doing it for creating reports to write an article that like you're supposed to do for this class for the final project. So the main thing is that the purpose of the um, chart is to tell a story that is understandable, and a story that is clear. The simple, the better. The simpler the story is, the simpler the chart is, the better it is. And then try to emphasize on the content so that it can help someone when they read it. And here you can see the bars are lost here in the beauty of it. We don't know what this axis refers to. We don't know what this axis refers to. We don't know what this axis refers to. So the chart by itself is not understandable. It's not clear. It's not simple. So this is an example of a bad chart. Then having said that, let me tell you what kind of tools can you use to actually create these charts, the beautiful ones, not the ones like this. Well, we will definitely be talking about Excel, and we'll look at what these charts are and how to create these charts. But there are other ways. There is SPSS, which is just statistical software. There is JMP. There is MATLAB, and there is R. These are all different applications or software you can use. There's online Google specific software that you can use. There is more information graphic system that you can use, but there is also more powerful, recently developed and popularized software called the Tableau. So we'll pay attention to these two. First, we'll talk about spreadsheet, then we'll specifically talk about the features of Tableau. And the idea is very simple, to create charts that can help you tell your story in a clear, succinct and understandable way. Well, let's talk about some best practices. In the next slide, I'm going to show you an example of a good chart and talk about some features that make it a good chart. Well, let's look at one such example of a good, not necessarily the best, but a reasonably good chart as an example of best practices. But before that, the idea of best practices um, in developing charts comes from a theory of infographic excellence proposed by Tufts in 1983. And the idea is very simple. Your chart should be able to show the data. That's the important thing. You're trying to show patterns in your data. And that should be clear by just looking at the chart. You can see some patterns here, right? So your data is being shown here in terms of some charts. And we don't know the specifics yet. But if you look at it, the first thing you can look at and say, okay, what is this x-axis? What is the y-axis? Well, if a good chart or a reasonably good one should name these things, like what is the x-axis? Well, x-axis here is first day in quarter. So each year has 4 quarters. So it's talking about first day in a quarter. Let's look at the title of the chart. What does it say? It says quarterly changes in US real GDP. So it's talking about GDP changes quarterly from 2000 to 2013. So you can think of this that data as changes in GDP being represented by this graph, and it covers years from 2000 to 2013, 13 years, and each year is broken down into quarters. That's why it's quarterly. So the name suggests a lot about what the chart is. So that's a good practice. Then also, it also states the name of the y-axis. If we see, although it's not a great practice to present it this way, it should go this way. So you can read it this way. It says percentage change. So that means a percentage change in GDP on the first day of each quarter. As you can see, the percentage change is small here. Sometimes the percentage change is negative. Sometimes the percentage change is positive. And you can clearly see some specific quarters when it dropped versus when it actually went up. So you can visually kind of look at it and think about it. That's what a chart should be able to do to make viewers think about the content of it, right? And that's what this graph is doing. And again, it's important to not distort the data. Again, we'll talk about that later, but is to not manipulate the data to look like this graph, make this graph or this bar smaller, or make this graph bigger. There are some ways of doing it. That should not be done. And it should be in a coherent fashion in a sense that this line should only represent one thing. It should not represent multiple things. And the story should be, when someone looks at it, it should show a coherent understanding of, okay, what is it about? A change in GDP. Wow, good. It's not over years. It is about quarters. Okay, that means that the four units or the 3 or 4 units would specifically refer to 1 year, it seems like. So you can kind of make inferences and think about stuff. That's how it should be. And you should make it easier to compare parts of the data, right? You can think of, okay, if I divide these into 6 years here, I don't know if it's 12 years, but 6 years here, then you can see some trends, right? One is mostly positive here, and it's most of it is negative, and negative is too negative. So that's like, make it clear to compare the parts. Have a clear purpose. In other words, before you create a chart, you should know why you're creating it so that it matches with the story you're trying to tell and supports it. Um, so again, this refers to your report that you create. It should match with this. If you're talking not about, if in your report, let's imagine you're talking about GDP change yearly, but the graph you're showing here is quarterly, then your description doesn't match with this, right? You should have a yearly change as opposed to quarterly change then. So if you have this chart, then you should have a description the quarterly. So the idea is to create the story first, and the chart is merely helping you tell your story. So that is the purpose of this chart, not the other way around. Um, then then show the information from general to particulars. Again, this may not apply to this particular example here, but if you're comparing several things, make sure somebody would be able to compare at general level and also at a specific level. So yeah, that's the end of this unit.